Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Yomi Baba comments we learned for Achenukol Beis Yisrael Sumas Shibya. All those wounded, all those fighting, everybody should come home safely. Says the Gemara from the fourth line of Daf Yud Gimel. Yesterday we were discussing the famous Shita of Rav Yosef Glili, who says that Kachim Kalim, like the classic case is Shlomim, but there are others also, Bechor, Meiser, Carbon Toda, which is a kind of Shlomim. He says very simply that those are considered Mammon Balim, and you own them. You own them. Now, Gemara differentiated and said after the animal is slaughtered, after it's geschochten and slaughtered, then when the Balim or the Kohanim eat different parts of it, that doesn't belong to them. They're eating Mishulchan Gabar. They're eating from God's table. That doesn't belong to them. But when the animal is still alive, then it belongs to the owner, says Rabbi Yossi Aglivi. The Mefarshim explain when we say what it means to the owner, what does that mean? He could sell it to somebody else, but the other person cannot get a kapara. The Ktsos HaChoshen says, the other guy you could sell it to him so he could eat the meat, sell it to him by the pound. In other words, once this person, Reuven, had set aside a carbon shlomim, he could sell that to Shimon, but Shimon can't use it as a carbon on his behalf. Can't use it on his behalf. He could sell it to Shimon so Shimon could eat the meat, but it doesn't work for Shimon as a carbon. In other words, he is the one who is usually in a shlom. We're not talking about a kapara, but when you chayiv a shlomim for whatever it was, there are karbanos that you chayiv a shlomim for. But for that, only Reuben is considered the miskaper, no one else. And that's what he means that even according to Yosef Galili, that Kachim Kalim, that Mammon Balim, it's still Osir Ba'anosh, Kachim Asur Ba'nam and Torah. Even according to Yosef Galili, there's no Me'ilah until after Zrika Saddam, and that's only on the Emurim, the fatty parts, but still it's Osir Ba'anosh, you shouldn't have enough from it. So those are the portion I'm trying to understand Yosef Galili Shita. In any case, let's look again at the Gemara. Now is going to continue with the discussion of Yosef Glili Gufa on the fourth line of Daf Yud Gimel. Mo'alamal b'Hashem, you commit a sin against God, and says v'kichaf misa by lying about something that you were a shomer for, and then you admit to it afterwards after you swore falsely. You have to bring a carbon asham, and you have to pay. You pay back the principal and with an additional 25%. The Gemara goes on there. L'rabos kashim kam shem amona to Rabbi Yosef. This is Rabbi Yosef L'shita. Rabbi Hashem says Lashem, something Lashem, and the kichish miso. So what is something that belongs to God? It's also against belongs to the individual. Bamiso, your friend, your compatriot, and you're sinning against both. That's kachim kalim, which have kedusha to Shemaim, but they still belong to you. That's Rabbi Yosef Glili Shita that Kachim Kalim belonged to the person who was Makdashim. Now in yesterday's Gemara, we talked about it at the top of the page, but here the Gemara said, Rashi tells us over here, Ben Azai is explaining Rabbi Yosef Glili. When Rabbi Yosef says Ben Azai says Shlam, he's not arguing with Rabbi Yosef Glili. Rabbi Yosef Glili was a Tana. Ben Azai says that includes Shlam, meaning that when Rabbi Yosef Glili says Kachim Kalim, so Ben Azai explains he's speaking specifically about Shlomim, not others apparently. Gemara is going to deal with that in a minute. Rabbi Yosef ben Testoy Omer, Lo Omer Ben Azai El B'Chor. Ben Azai was explaining Rabbi Yosef Glili. He's only coming to talk about a B'Chor, nothing else. Another B'Chor is also kind of Kachim Kalim, but apparently not Shlomim. Loba el b'chor, so bilvad. That's it. El b'chor bilvad. So we have Rabbi Yosef Glili, we have Ben Azai explaining him, and then we have Rabbi Yosef ben Testoy explaining Ben Azai. So let's understand it. The Gemara now tries to explain these sheetas. Amar Mar Ben Azai Omer l'Rabba says Shlam. Welcome back, Michael. Amar Mar Ben Azai Omer l'Rabbos es Shlamim says to include Shlamim l'mutei mai. In other words, Rabbi Yosef Glili said that Mal Basham Kirsumiso includes Kachim Kalim, which belongs to the owner. It's Mammon Balim. Again, as we said, while the animal's alive, he could be Mekadosh Nisha with it, presumably. He could sell it to somebody else. Not in terms of kapara, but in terms of the meat. He's giving the meat or selling the meat to somebody else. So Benaz says, Rabba says to Shlom Limutai, what do you mean Shlom? Shlom excluding what? Not all Kachim column? Ilam Limutai Bechor, you're trying to exclude Bechor. What are you talking about? And Rashi says, Limutai Bechor, we're talking about Bechor B'chutz Laaretz. Bechor in Chutz Laaretz, which is not standing. He said, according to Shimon says, you could bring it to Chutz Eretz Yisrael if it was Tamim and all that, bring it over, but it's not standing to bring for a carbon. Therefore, the owner owns it. Whoever has the bechor, he can give it to the Kohen, sell it to a Kohen, give it to the Kohen. A shlamim requires laying on of the hands, smicha, libations, waving the chaz of a shok, includes a whole process in the base of Mikdash. And still you say, Amit Ma'am Ba'am, it belongs to the owner, it's his. It doesn't, even though it has all these holy aspects to it in the base of Mikdash. A bechor b'chutz laaretz, which is not even going to be brought as a carbon. Certainly, you're not eating mishulchan gavoa. It's not mishulchan gavoa. It's not standing to be brought as a carbon in the base of Mikdash. So you're not eating it there. It just belongs to the Kohen, and he has to give it to the Kohen. It's his. It's the owner's, and he can't take it himself. He has to give it to the Kohen. So there certainly. How can you say that when Ben Azai says it includes shlamim excluding bechor? Shlamim is more holy, has all these base of Mikdash aspects to it, and you say that's still mum and balam. So bechor b'chutz laaretz certainly. So when Ben Azai says include shlamim, it doesn't mean to exclude bechor. Bechor also would be included to exclude maser. Why? Kedatanya bechor by bechor it says lo tipadi. You can't redeem a bechor. You can't say, you know what, I'm going to exchange the bechor for something else. Bechor is kaddish and that's it. V'nimker tam chai. You could sell it to a Kohen as it's while it's unblemished, even while it's alive, and the Kohen will have to deal with it. If it can't bring it as a carbon, he can, in Chutz Laaretz, he could wait till it gets a mum and then shecht it needed. Ubal mum, if it was already had a permanent blemish, you could sell it either alive or slaughter or shecht it, or slaughter, but it's got to be given to the Kohen. It belongs to the Kohen. You may be able to eat from it if it has a balmum, but it belongs to the Kohen. You have to give it or sell it to him. But Maser Nemer, by Maser, it says, Lo Yigo, you can't redeem it. If you have Maser Behema, it was designated, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 10, the 10th one is Maser, you cannot sell it, and whether alive or not, Lo Tam V'lo Balmum, whether it had a mum or not. In other words, even if it once it's designated as Maser Behema, and it's unblemished, it has to be brought as a carbon, you can't sell it. And even if it has a balmum, even if it's a blemish, you can't sell it. Special halacha because it says lo part of lo yigoel. So he's excluding that. That's not mum and bala because he doesn't have the option of selling it and dealing with it as he wants. So Ben Azai, when he says shlamim and including bechor, he's excluding meiser. Ravina masni aseifa. He says the same business with the meiser, but it's going in the seifa. Ben Azai says that when Ben Azai is explaining when he says that kashim kalim are mum and balam, he's only talking about bechor. If it's excluding shlamim, what do you mean? Hashtama bechor shekadosh merachamim. Look at a different kal b'chomer. Manash bechor, which is automatically holy from the womb of its mother, and you say mamona, who it still belongs to the owner, to the balam, to the owner of the animal. Shlomim, boy, shlomim, which is not, there's no such thing as shlomim designated automatically from them. It's got to be designated by a person later on. So it doesn't have the same holiness. So if bechor is considered your mammon, even though it's holy mibrechem, certainly shlomim should be considered mammon balam. So Rabbi Yochanan lemutei meiser. So he learned the same drasha that Rabbi Yochanan said. In other words, Ravina said Maisla that Rabbi Yochanan's answer it's excluding Meiser is going on this case. Muta Meiser, Kedatine, like the same Gemara we just had a minute ago. Bechor can be sold either unblemished alive or blemished live or slaughtered. The Meiser never lo yigoel. You can't redeem it all. So therefore, Meiser is more of a svar to say it's not mum and balam, and that's what he's excluded. So whether you learn like the Pashut Pshat Ben Azai or Abi Yossi Ben Destoy, who says so, he's only coming to that Ben Azai is only coming to include Bechor Bilvad. So he's not really excluding shlomim as we said. That should certainly be mam and baalim. If bechor, which is kadosh merechim, is mam and baalim, this certainly he's excluding meiser. But the problem with that is, you said you include shlomim as a kal v'chomer. If bechor, which is kadosh merechim, is mam and baalim, certainly shlomim. But the Gemara says, but that doesn't fit into the words. If you look at the words of Rabbi Yossi ben Distoy at the top of the page, the sixth line from the top of the page, Rabbi Yossi ben Distoy Omer lo Omer ben Azi ela b'bechor bilvad. He clearly says bechor only, not shlamim. A bechor bilvad kamer kasha. It's taka kasha. How would he explain that? How would he explain it? He'll say he doesn't hold that kal v'chomer. He'll say that shlamim is more kaddish because it has smicha and sachem to his chaz of a show. You could give that kind of an answer, but the Gemara doesn't bother with that. It just says that's the kasha of a Yosef the story. Rav Amar, now Rav is going back on the original drasha. If you look on yesterday's Daf on Yud Beis Amid Beis, right? We started this. We're dealing with the Mishnah on Testament Beis. The Mishnah on Testament Beis says, where do all these rules of Nezikin apply? If I have to guard it, if I have to watch part of it, I'm chayiv in the whole thing. We talked about if you were mashlim the vora that we talked about the other day, right? Nechasim she'ein b'amila. And we said you're only chayiv the rules of Nezikin on nechasim that have no sacrilege involved. Now, why don't you just say, what do you mean? Nechasim have no sacrilege involved? Just say nechasim that are not hektish, as we had before as a machlokas. But the general opinion is that if my shore damaged hektish shore, I don't have to pay. There's a shita that you're not. I'm not. We had that before. We mentioned before. We'll have it later on that pasuk says if my shore gored your shore. So I have to pay the first 3 times chatzi nezek, right, Tom, and after the animal was after you were warned in court 3 times, and the animal's a mu'ah, you have to pay nezek shalom. That's only ki yashor ish ashor reyehu. But if it's shor hegdish, I don't have to pay it all, or I have to pay everything. There's no dispensation for a tam. Okay, that's the general idea, but it can't be. The regular rules of damages do not apply by a holy animal. So just say nechasim that are not holy. What's the she'ein b'hem me'ilah? So first we wanted to say there's no me'ilah, but it's still kadosh. Why the lashon of me'ilah? Just say nechasim that are not hektish. Nechasim she'ein no hektish, or nechasim nechsei hedyo. Why don't you just say that? The fact that he said nechasim she'ein b'hem me'ilah tells you we're speaking about me'ilah hudalas. There's no me'ilah, but it's still kachim. That's Rabbi Yosef that we've been discussing for the last amud, who holds that kachim kalim are mam and balim, and therefore the rules of Nizakin, animals damaging one another, would apply there as well. So if your animal damaged an animal that was a shlomim, let's say, or kachim kali, lily, the rules would apply, the regular rules of Nizik would apply. Now Rava gives another answer to that question. Rava no, he's going on yesterday's daf, really, right? Rava, there's no dimil, meaning that there's no hektish there at all. Even kachim kalim, Rashi says kachim says Rashi, but even kachim kalim have rules of me'ilah. As we said, there's no me'ilah in kachim kalim while the animal was alive, or even after shech. But there is me'ilah on the emurim of the kachim kalim after zrikas adam. After you shechita kabbalah zrikas adam, the emurim have to be burnt. The emurim are kachim. That's the point. The emurim of kachim kalim animals are really kachim. So there is me'ilah there. That's why Rashi says kachim. Rashi says Rav Omer me'ilah de maslisin lo teidik me hamikdash kachim. Don't say there's no me'ilah, but there are kachim. Eloch kamer she'ein b'am din me'ilah she'ein b'am shum kedusha l'shamayim. So kedusha l'shamayim shachet din me'ilah kagon kachim. It doesn't mean to say as opposed to kachim kalim. Even kachim kalim have a din of me'ilah on the emurim, which are kachim. The emurim are kachim. The emurim of the kachim kalim are kachim. So the din of emurim would apply after he did zrikas adam. There is me'ilah there, and therefore, what are we speaking about? The hedyot enachanami, when he says that the rules of nezikin only apply to the chasim shein bandila, he means all kachim. If there's kachim, it has to be something which is not kodesh. If it's kachim, then the rules of nezikin don't apply. The chasim shein bandila, my ninu, the hedyot belong to a hedyot, commoners, not hedyot. So if we listen to the hedyot, kasha and achanami. Why didn't he just say the chasim the hedyot of a hedyot? Why did he say the chasim shein bandila? Why did he say in that strange lashon? It's longer and it's strange. Anyway, just say the chasim the hedyot and achanami. It's a kasha. That's a kasha on Rava. That's the reason why the first answer Rav Yochanan's answer is no, that it's going like Rav Yossi Glili. We're talking about Kachim Kalam that don't have Me'ila, basically don't have Me'ila, but the rules of the Ziku would apply. Omarav, here's an interesting one. Shlomim Sheziku, let's say you have a Shlom, even apparently this is going even controversially. Let's say Shlomim, you have an animal of Shlomim, you were Makdish an animal of Shlomim, and it went and did damage. Now it belongs to you. If an animal of Hegdish, if you had a Chatos went and did damage, you don't, because Hegdish doesn't have to pay, right? So we said the predominant cheat is even if you damage an animal, if your animal damages an animal of Hegdish, you don't have to pay. And certainly if an animal of Hegdish damages, you don't have to pay. But here's the question: what about Shlom? Shlom is your animal. It's according to basically it's Mum and Balam. So Shlom Shaziku, Govim Son Bengam. Now, if it's a tam we said pays 50%, right, of the damage, but only out of the goof of the animal. Let's say you had an animal that was dying, it was worth $1, and it did damage to an animal that was worth $100. Right? Let's say it damaged to another animal was worth $100 and damaged him to the tune of $90, whatever the damage was. They damaged the animal. So you pay 50%, but only up until only out of the goof of the animal. So the animal's only worth $1. That's all you could get. That's it. So Shlom Shaziku, go with something I'm going. Here's the point. Let's say one animal that was worth $200, right? $200 killed another animal that was also worth $200, right? Going short, Rashi gives that example. So now, what would you say? That each animal is worth $200, right? The damaging animal and the mazik and the nizik are both worth $200. Okay, so the damage that was done was $200 worth. So you would pay $100 out of the mazik animal. That's why you pay 50%, right? But part of the animal is a murim, and that's kachim, and that doesn't pay at all. Pardon?
Not yet.
Yeah, well, but that's part of the animal. Part of the animal, not you can only since you'll get if you're talking about a mu'eh, you pay the whole thing. Okay, fine. So he has to pay the whole thing out of his land, out of his a bank account, whatever. But here you only pay it out of the goof of the animal. Part of the goof of the animal is the murim. The one that's doing the damage, part of the head is doing the damage, the feet's doing the damage, the intestines. They're imurim already. It's just that there's no they're imurim already, except that the rules of Mila don't apply until you did Rika Saddam, but the imurim are there. So he says Shlom Shaziku Gobim Sarn Be'en Gobim Imurim. You can only collect from the meat. So let's assume this case: $200 both animals worth $200. One animal killed the other animal, right? Now the damage the mazik animal is worth 200, but let's say out of the 200, 75%, $150 is meat, and the other 50% is the emurim, the fatty parts inside. So you know what? He only has to pay $75 out of the 150. He doesn't pay the other half, right? Even though he did, if it was, you would think normally, right? If a regular animal damaged another animal and they were all at the same time, he has to pay 50% of the damage. How much was the damage? $200. But you can only pay that out of the goof of the animal, right? Out of the goof of the animal.
You can only pay 50%
out of the goof of the mazik's animal. Now the mazik's also worth $200, but out of the $200 of the mazik's animal, $50 is a murim.
But there is $100 that's
right.
That's in the mazik's animal.
There is $100 in the mazik's animal.
That's what I'm saying. The 50% of the mazik's body or the 50% of the nizik's
body? It's the mazik's body, but the damage is $100.
There is $100.
No. Okay, there's $100 worth of. There's $100 in there, but the chiyuv to pay is only $100, and that's $100. The mazik's body was only $150. It's only $150 worth of the mazik's body is $150 of the body,
right?
And therefore you can only be mechayev him half of that because that's all he has to pay out of the mazik's body, 50%. You understand?
It's not 50% of the damage, it's 50% of the mazik's body.
It's 50% of the damage, but that has to come out of the mazik.
50% of the damage is there.
Right, no, it's 50% also out of the mazik. That's the point. That's more right. That would have to take a look at Rashi right before the lines get wide. It's really going to the next case. Then it goes, Kagon. Can I give a word? Could go in shor shava masayim shenagach shor shava masayim. Ain't go over el chatzi damav chatzi demei b'soro, half of his body. Afal gav de lohavi manashalim even something with the chatzi imurin lo yishtalim with the chatzi acher shalabasa. You don't pay. The point is you might say this. Okay, look. Why can't you make up the 50%? Why can't you make up the 50% of the nezek, which would be a total of $100, out of the basar, because there was $150 with the basar, to make up for the emurim, which you don't have to pay at all, because the emurim are not high to pay. That's the chiddush. Shlam sheziku govim v'sarim ve'en govim emurim. You don't collect from the emurim at all. In other words, you don't make it up. You don't make up for the lack of payment from the emurim by including more basar. So the Gemara says, Pshit, isn't it obvious? Emurim, l'gavosalki, emurim belong to Hashem, and you can't pay from that. So let's read it. L'govim v'sarim keneged emurim. Of course, you only pay out of the basar. In other words, you only say there's $150 of basar, so he only has to pay 50% of that. He has to pay 50% of that. Okay. Fine, you only pay 50%. In other words, it's both, Michael. In other words, it's what you're saying. So it's twice. In other words, you only have to pay 50% of the damage, and the 50% is only out of half of the body, and the buster is only $150, so he pays $75. But why don't you say, look at the whole animal was worth $200. The whole mazik's animal worth $200. So make up from the emurim, take another $25 of basar, keneged emurim in place of emurim. You don't say that. Right? That's a chiddush. Let's read it. You don't make it up from the fact that leave it on. Now Rashi brings down the case. What are we speaking over there? An animal of Tam pushed another animal into a pit, and the animal died. Right? The animal died. Pushed the other animal to the pit. Now they come and they find this dead animal in the pit. So who has to pay what? So Rabbanan say, look, the Rabbanan say, this Tom, say worth $100, he only has to pay a quarter. Why? Because he could say the pit did part of the damage. My animal just pushed him. Wouldn't have killed him. The pit did some of the damage, and the animal did part of the damage. So the animals at Tom only have to pay 50%, but since he didn't do all the damage, they'll pay a quarter. And what about the owner of the pit? The pit could say, my pit didn't do it. The other guy pushed him in. So according to Rabbanan, the other one, the pit doesn't pay anything. And if he was a mu'ed, let's say the pushing animal was a mu'ed, they'll say fine, you still only have to pay 50% because he only did part of the damage, so you pay 50, and the balabor pays nothing. That's the Rabbanan Shita. So the Rabbanan say Rabbanan Shita, just because you can't get paid from one, you don't say since the damaging animal he doesn't have to pay the whole thing, you can't go after the owner of the pit. So certainly over here, just because the emurim can't do the damage, right? Just because the emurim can't pay because they belong to Hegdish, you don't take it out of the other part, out of the basar part. You leave it Rav Nassan holds over there. No, you could. Whatever the pushing animal doesn't pay, the balabor has to. Like a Rashi at the widest lines, right before the lines get very wide. The Betam Balashor Mishal Rabia, Ubalabor pays 3/4. In other words, he says in that case, if a pushing animal pushed an animal into a pit and the animal died, right? So we said the pushing animal, if he's a Tom, only pays a quarter, right? Because he only paid 50% anyway, and he'll claim, well, I didn't do all damage. If the pit wouldn't have been there, I didn't do it. So he pays a quarter. The Balabor pays the rest, the 3/4, because he found him there. And if he's a mu'ed, the Baal Shor pays half of the Balabor pays half. So you back in the Gemara. And Rav Nassan, if you can't pay from one, you pay from the other. So according to Rav Nassan, Manavshach, we said, according to Rabbanan, it's pshita that just because you can't collect from the emurim, you can't make it up by paying more of the basar. Right? That's a pshita. And according to Rav Nassan, why shouldn't you pay more? Why shouldn't you pay? According to Rav Nassan, if the animal that was killed in the pit, whatever he can collect from one, he collects. Whatever he can't collect from the Bala Shore, from the pushing animal, he can get from the owner of the pit. So why can't you collect kinega that? Ma'am Shalai. So you buy some Nasan, you buy some Rabbani. You could say that this is necessary according to either one. You buy some Rabbani. You could say that this idea, again, that if an animal of Shlomim killed an animal, a regular animal, you only collect, and he's a tam, he only pays half out of the basar, and not out of the. He doesn't make up for the emurim by paying more out of the basar. Where do you say that the rabbis say you can't collect from what you don't go up there? By two gufim, because we're talking about the owner of the pit and the owner of the pushing animal. But if it's one, the animal did it, I'm going to get paid for the whole thing. I don't care. In the case where there's two guys there, there's the owner of the pushing animal and the owner of the pit. So each guy, so he could say, listen, I didn't do my pit didn't do any damage. This animal pushed him in there. That's what the Rabbanan say. Just because you can't collect from the owner of the pushing animal doesn't mean you can come after me. But over here, it's one animal who did it. If I can't collect out of this part of the animal, because it's a mura, maybe I should be able to collect out of it. Kamash Malan. So Rav Abba says, no, Shlomi Shazika, you can only collect out of the bus and out of the murim. Right? Aval B'chad Guf from Matzi Amalei. You call it Echbin Mishnah, I'll collect from Rav Rav Nasser, or you can say goes to Rav Nasser, who says that when you cannot collect from the pushing animal, you can collect from the owner of the pit. Right? Hasam Hudamalei Balashor Balabor. There, the owner of the animal that was killed, the Nizik can say to the Balabor, listen, I'm not to Rabbi Bachush. I found my animal in your pit. Your animal is dead my animal is dead in your pit. I'll collect from whoever I can collect. You're responsible. He pushed him in there too. My whatever I can't collect from the owner of the pushing animal, I'm going to collect from you. But over here, can he say, listen, only the basar did the damage, the emurim did not damage, the whole animal did the damage. Therefore, the owner of the dead animal cannot say, I'm only going to collect from here, not collect from there. In there, he said, listen, I'm going to collect from one, whatever, I'm not going to collect from the other. But over here, he can't say that the basar did the damage, the emurim did damage, I can go after this one. There's only one animal there. So you might say, here he doesn't have that kind of an excuse. Therefore, the chiddush is that Shlom Shizika Govim Saram and Govim Emurim. You can't collect me. You can't differentiate between the two. In the case of Rav Nelson with the boar, when the animal pushed the boar, there he could say, listen, my animal's dead in here. You should pay me everything. Okay, if you want me to go after him, I can get him. He also did damage. They're like co-defendants. I'll go after both of you. But over here, there's only one guy. Can he say, this did the damage, that one didn't do damage, he can't go after them. And therefore he should be able to say, the logic would say that you can't do the same thing. Rav Nassan says, according to Rav Nassan, maybe we thought that maybe you should be able to collect from the other one. If whatever you can't collect from the emurim, you can collect from the basar. But over here, they both did damage. So maybe you should be able to collect kamashmal. That's where he says that no, that you cannot collect. Amarabba, Toda Shizika. Toda, we know, Toda is a kind of a shlomim, but it has rules that are different. It's only eaten for one day and a night as opposed to shlomim, and you have to bring breads with it also. Toda Shizika, let's say a Toda did damage. And again, we're assuming we're going according to Yosef Glili that a carbon Toda is like shlomim, and therefore it's mum and balim, and therefore it's like the damage Ishla Reyehu, and you're chayiv. Gom of Sarah, you can collect from the owner. Let's say a Toda, and that's a tam, you were makdish a carbon to be a Toda, and it's a tam animal. You can collect from the meat of the animal, the 50%. You can't collect from the bread. You don't collect from the bread. Okay. In other words, the nizik can collect from the lechem shita. Lechem shita, of course, why would you collect the bread? The bread didn't do any damage. The animal did the damage. You collect from the damaging animal, the animal itself. The safe is for chalev. There's a chesed. Nizik ochel basar. What's the rule? After your makr of the animal, after all, it's still a carbon toda, it doesn't lose its kedusha. How does he collect? After you went through shchita kabbalah, lochas rika, makdish, and your bernei murim, the nizik will eat the meat up to the tune of 50%. Umiskaper maybe lechem, but who brings the bread? Who's supposed to bring the bread? Even though the nizik might eat the animal, right? May eat the animal at 50%. The miskaper, the owner of the toda, he has to bring the bread. So Hanami Pshita, isn't that obvious? Why shouldn't he have to bring the bread? What is the lechem Pshita? Isn't it obvious there too? Yes, no. Ma'adahem, I'd say kivan the lechem hachsher the zebach, since lechem is what's necessary to make the zebach fit without the lechem, you can't. The carbon can't be brought. Lay malay, let the owner of the toda say, "You're eating the meat, and I got to bring the bread. I have to bring the bread, most of which goes to the Kohanim, right? Or sections go to the Kohanim. Not only most of it, 10% goes to Kohanim. But I have to bring the bread. You're eating the meat, and I have to bring the bread. That's the point. The lechem is an obligation of the balam. It has nothing to do with the damaging. The damaging is done by the toda, by the animal, and the toda he's paid out of the basar of the meat. Nizik lacher say more. Bring the meat.
So the balam wouldn't have to bring another carbon.
No, he's Yosef with the carbon. That's what we said at the beginning. We said that at the beginning. They even part of Yosef Glili, the animal, the shlum, even a carbon. Let's say you're makadosh nisha with it, or you could sell a shlum to somebody else. In terms of the meat, that who's going to get the meat, like you're selling it by the pound, so to speak. Right. But the animal is still on the shame. On the miskaper is still the one who was makdish it, and he's the one who gets credit for bringing it as a carbon. If he has to bring the carbon total, let's say. In those days, it's like we bench gomel today. You brought it for those 4 things. So he has to bring one. He has to bring it. If he sold it or he did damage with it, or the animal did damage. Right. So the nizik is entitled to half of the meat of the animal up, according to if he's a tam. If it's a mu'ay, then he'd have to pay the entire meat. Or if it's a mu'ay, it doesn't go by the meat. He'd have to pay him out of cash also. But let's assume we're talking about and you pay the whole amount. But let's assume he's a tam. You have to pay 50% of the meat, but the carbon still belongs to the owner. He would get credit for it. All right, the Chasim Sheshet. Now, the Mishnah, if you look back, let's look at the Mishnah back on Daf Pesach and Beis, and we're still dealing with that Mishnah. Mishnah and many parts to it. We learned that from here that he has to make up the difference. Low. Remember that the nizik has to deal with the dead animal, with the depreciation after it was killed. That's called Shav Shema. And if I'm chayav for guarding it, the rules of Shmira. The chasim shem b'mila, that's what we've been discussing yesterday and today. The chasim that have no meila, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that includes even kachim kalam. According to Rav Glili, according to Rava, it means all pekdish animals are excluded. It's only the chasim which belong to a hedyav. And then we said the chasim shehain shel b'nei bris, animals that only belong to Jews. If my animal damages a goyish animal, I'm patur. You don't have to pay the rules, the regular rules of the Zika apply. Now, obviously, if you're in a place where the rules of the country apply, you don't have chosadina. But based on the halacha, the chasim shema is only Jewish animals you have to pay. You might say that, if I damage it myself, it's one rule, but if my animal damages the animal, patur. The chasim shema b'rislimut, and what is that? So ilamutim, ever excluding those above the chavim. It's a Mishnah later on. Shor shal Yisrael shenagach shor shal b'chavim patur. We already have the Mishnah later on. The answer is Tana V'Adam Mefarish. Our Tana is like the beginning of that. This is the preamble. Nechasim shein ban bris. That's the rule. And then we explain it later on that it means a shor shel Yisrael shenagach shor shel b'chavim patur. In the reverse, I think the halacha will see that later on. For Goisha, shor kills our shor, he has to pay, and he has no rule of 50% for a tam. That'll all be described later on. But the point is that our Mishnah is like a preamble to later on. Nechasim amiyuchadim. Also, so it has to be in order for the rules of the Zikin to apply, rules of Kam and Mu'id, etc. We're speaking specifically about Karen, but others also. The Chasim that belong to Jews, and the Chasim Amiyuchadim that are special, or really Miyuchad really means that are owned. What do we come to exclude? In other words, Miyuchad means that are singular. Really, the word miyuchad is best translated, I think, is singular, but in what sense? So it means that you know who it is. What does it mean? Let's say there was a fight. Who damaged the shore? My shore was found dead. There were 2 shores that were running after it. Each one claimed the other guy's shore did the damage. You don't know who it is. So you can't collect. So we also learned that later on. Hayushaim wrote from Acharecha, 2 animals were running after one animal. Zeh Omer Shor Chazik. One guy said, Reuben said, your shore killed the guy. Zeh Omer Shor Chazik. And Reuben said, no, yours did it. Shneim P'turim. So we already see that later on. The answer again, Tani V'Adam Mefarish. Again, the Chasim Yuchadim have a singular assets. What do we mean by that? We mean that it's singular in the sense that you can define, you know for sure who was the damaging animal, who did the damage. So again, our mission was not clear, just as a preamble. Later on, it explained. Masita in a brisa we learned that when it says Yuchada means prat l'nefsei hefker. Yuchada means that singular in the sense that you know who owns it, not who did the damage, but who owns the animal, right? Masita prat l'nefsei hefker. Not that we're not sure who did the damage, but if the damage was done to an animal of hefker, you don't have to pay. What's the case when you have to hefker? Even the nagach toward the done the toward the hefker. If your animal damaged shore of hefker, man tavale, who is pressing charges? Nobody. What's the issue over here? It's only if it belonged to somebody. If it's hefker, you don't have to pay. What do you mean you have to pay? Who's pressing charges? No, here's what happened. A shore of hefker damaged my hefker, right? So I'm going to sue that animal. So listen, who are you suing? There's somebody to sue.
My hefker doesn't mean
what I say?
A shore of hefker.
No, my animal damaged a shore of hefker, right? If a shore of hefker damaged if my animal damaged a shore of hefker, so you say you don't have to pay. Why? Well, of course you don't have to pay. Who doesn't belong to anybody? Who's pressing charges? No, we're talking out here where a shore of hefker damaged my shore, damaged my shore, right? So who am I pressing charges? That's more says. If my shore damaged, who's pressing charges? The hefker done. Shore of hefker may damage mine. All right, so who am I pressing charges? So there's nothing to press charges. Go take that animal, right? Just take the animal. Just take the animal. What happened is, before I got a chance to take it, somebody else acquired it from hefker. Now, so she'd have to pay. When he owned it, it didn't do the damage, right? When he owned it, it didn't do the damage. The answer was somebody else got it. So you say, yeah, but this animal damaged it. But it wasn't mine. It wasn't mine. So it wasn't mine at the time. I'm not responsible. We had a lady in the neighborhood ask me, I don't mention her name. She got a ticket for driving on Route 1 coming into Yerushalayim, right? And all of a sudden the left lane becomes a bus lane. You know, you got to move over real quick. She didn't move over fast enough, and the camera caught her. 500 shekels. So she wanted to go to court, argue it. It wasn't. They really don't allow you enough time. It's like all of a sudden it becomes a bus lane. So she wanted to argue it in court. So I said, "You'll never win. You can't win these. You can't beat these things." She says, "Yeah, well, but a week later, I had an accident and the car was sold. I sold the car. You think that'll help?" Yeah, I shot the guy, but I threw away the gun. So is that okay now? Like, what does it help? At the time, you have to look at the time of the infraction, madam. So the point here is, at the time that this animal of hefker did the damage, it was ownerless. Now this other guy found this animal. He says, "Don't tell me. I didn't have nothing to do with it." So he's like, "You should come to Okay, so that's what happened. So there's nobody. You can't claim it. So that's too bad. So that's what you mean over here. It's got to be owned by somebody. Both.
Sure. Against him.
No. Doesn't work that way. There's no owner to it. It doesn't work. You can't say that. You can't say that. You could think of other cases of somebody. There was an ownerless knife in the street. And somebody walked by and they cut their toe on it. Now, what's the idea that you could take the knife? Somebody else picked up the knife right afterwards. Is he responsible? You could see that. Ravina or lemute nagach b'achkachikdish. Another case where it wasn't milchad. Let's say the animal did damage, right? And there was an owner on both sides, and he was makdish the animal. He was makdish afterwards, or nagach hifkor, or he did damage, and then I was mafker. Now, again, in this case, you can only take it. We're talking about a tam. You only get it out of the body of the animal. There's no animal to collect from anymore because it's either hektish or it's hefker. Tani Miyacha Yesok and Rav Yehuda said another case talking about over there about cases where an animal is high of death for killing somebody, but you have to take him to court and have an owner and all that. If there's no owner, you don't kill the animal. Rav Yehuda says another case. You have testimony against the owner in court, yeah, right? The Hamas and he killed somebody. Those are the rules. You have to have an owner for both the time of that he killed the time that the animal killed somebody, and at the time that he was taken to court. What about the verdict? Hashor and Yiskel, the Gemara Dinu D'chsiv. By Hashor and Yiskel, it says that above all of. We're talking about the Gemara Dinu D'chsiv. In other words, the animal's only chai. In that case, it's to kill the animal when he killed and he was taken to court, and the verdict was all with the same owner. So the same thing over here is what we see over here. If you didn't have an owner, so what's the idea of nechasim yichadin? So we said to exclude if you don't know who did the damage, you're not sure which animal did the damage, or the animal was ownerless. The animal was ownerless, and you didn't get a claim on it at the time of the damage. It was ownerless, even if afterwards somebody acquired it, or even if it was owned at the time, but after it did the damage, before you could make a claim, the animal was either sanctified to the base of Mikdash or made hefker. Again, we're still looking at the Mishnah on Testament base. So in all these cases, you're chayiv. If it wasn't hegdish, let's say, and it was a Jewish animal, and you know who did it, and it wasn't hefker or hegdish or anything like that, and when we talk about the shame and regel that damage your potter, right? Your potter, it says, except for mazik. In other words, I'm chayiv if my animal goes into your yard and eats the fruits, right? Or if he damaged your stuff. But let's say your animal came into my yard. My animal could be in my yard. My animal runs around in my yard, right? In my barn or whatever, right? In my range. And your animal came in there. I'm not chayiv there. Who asked your animal to come in? So that's the point. It was just and then he goes on, right? He goes, if it's the mazik's own rishus, the Omerlay, Torcha Rishus, my boy, what is your animal doing in my Rishus? If you sent your animal into my Rishus and he got hurt, he had no permission to come in there. I'm not responsible for that. But then the Mishnah went on, okay, that's Chutz Mishus and Nechas Lamazik. Rishus HaNizik Lamazik. Let's say the Nizik and the Mazik are partners in a Rishus. What's the deal there? So it's not clear. The Mishnah says, Chutz Mishus and Nechas Mazik doesn't mean except for Rishus and Nechas Lamazik and Rishus HaNizik Lamazik, they both have permission, or Rishus HaNazik Lamazik, they're your chayiv. If they own, let's say they're partners and they both have animals there, they chayiv to pay. So it's not clear. We'll see two different opinions. If it's a shutton, two guys own it together, and one partner's animal damaged another partner's animal there. So it's that's what the mission means. The potter there, the mazik is potter because the nizik had no right to come in. Roshus nizik v'mazik, there chehizik chavamazik he has to pay. That's how one way to learn. That's Rav Chisda Amar Bime's way to learn. Rav Lezer Amar, this is important to remember Rav Lezer sheet. He says no. Potter al Hashem v'regel. He says no. In other words, when the Mishnah says Roshus your chutz mirshus michanes lamazik, that the mazik is potter there, he's also potter. Knows v'roshus nizik v'mazik is also potter is also going in that the chutz is also mirshus nizik v'mazik. That if they both had permission to be there, the mazik is potter. So if partners had a field or barn together and one animal stepped on another animal or ate something, then he's potter. Potter al Hashem v'regel. Chutz mishum shus and mazik. That is potter. Rishus and mesik masos nami potter. What is ukshehizik? What about the last words of the Mishnah? Ukshehizik, when you do damage, chava mazik, the mazik has to pay the tashlume nezik v'meitavars. What does that mean? Meitavars we've already explained. That includes keren. That includes keren. That's what he's teaching me the rules of keren. So that's good according to Shmuel. Shmuel, remember the first mission in the Masechet? What was that? Arban of Asikin, Ashor, Rabor, Marahev. Ashor, Shmuel said, is regel, and Mava is shame. So what about keren? Now we're talking about keren. Let's say keren. Shmuel, Rav, going to Rav that said Mava is what Adam, right? Mava is Adam. And Shor is all three, Karen, Shane, Berego. So we already learned Karen. Chava Mazik, let's say, what does that come to do? Like, she's a Chava Mazik, if people were responsible, they were guards, or they borrowed the animal, Shezika, Behemoth Beshusan, that did damage to an animal while it was in their Rishus, to include that. That's what the Brisa says. And nifritz balayla, let's say the barn broke up at night when it was an accident because of something that was under his control. There's something he couldn't control. Or robbers came and broke the barn down. The Yatsa Vazika, then you're potter. Let's understand this. This is what you say, that according to Rav, the last words of the Mishnah, includes these cases of Shomer. What's the case that he did damage? Now we understand. Listen, I'm speaking carefully. The shoel is the borrower, right? We said to include cases. The borrower is chayiv on everything except nisa kedarka, but he's chayiv even on onsen. So if a shoel borrowed the animal, and we said that he's chayiv over there to pay chatzi nezek, tam sham chatzi nezek, mum sham nezek. What's the case? What? Toward the mashal, toward the shoel. The acts of the borrowing to the owner. In other words, the one who gave the borrower the animal, right? I'm lending you my animal, and my animal damaged your animal, the Torah the Shoel. So what are you saying over there? The owner has to pay lay malay iluazik ba'alma bos shumeat. If my animal was in your charge, right? It was in your charge, and if while it was in your charge, it did damage, you would have to pay. You're responsible for it. You're chayav on everything. Anything that so hashada aske l'tur didach. Now that my animal has damaged your animal, be'ina l'shlumi, I have to pay. Why should I have to pay? Right? Why should I have to pay? If again you're saying that the mashal's animal damaged the shoel's animal, you could say, listen, it's your charge. If my animal damaged somebody else's while it was in your charge, you're responsible for that. You're responsible for the animal. You're fully responsible even for owning. You're chayiv for Geneva Neveda, for negligence. You're chayiv even for accidents. So you'd have to pay. So now that my animal has damaged your animal, your animal was your animal, and my animal was in your charge, was in your responsibility. So now that my animal is damaged, I should have to pay. Can't be that. El Da'aske to the shoal to the okay. The shoal's animal damaged the mashal's animal. Again, le malay. Ilu itzik me'alma. If my animal had been damaged from somebody else, you'd have to pay the whole thing. Why? Because my animal was in your charge. If something happened to it, you have to pay everything. I don't care about chatzi nezek or that. You have to pay. Now, right? But you have to pay for the whole animal. Hasha the aske tur didach. Now that what? That your animal has damaged my animal. You're only going to pay me half. If my animal was damaged while I was in your charge, you're responsible for everything. You have to pay the whole thing. So why just because it was damaged by your animal, you have to pay me half? That doesn't make sense. The lolam daske tur, the mashal, the tur, the shoel. Really, we're speaking about the owner, the mashal's animal, the lender's animal damaged the shoel's animal. Again, lolam daske tur, the mashal, the tur, the shoel. So you say, listen. If he's responsible for it, So if you're responsible to guard it, why should I have to pay you? Why should I have to pay even half? He only, when he accepted responsibility for it, he only accepts responsibility if anything would happen to the animal that I'm guarding. But if the animal did damage to somebody else, he specifically excluded responsibility for that. He didn't explain that. So therefore, in other words, I accept the responsibility to guard your animal from any damage that happened to the animal. I indemnify you from anything that happened to it. But if it goes and damages something else, in this case, it damaged my animal, there you have to pay. There you have to pay. Tom pays half, and the Amud pays half. Look at the seifa. And if it's Balila, if it broke out at night, right? They jumped out at night. If she puts listen was beyond control of the Zika Potter, you say your Potter, hubby yo mashma during the day, you'd be chayiv. Hello, you just said you're not responsible for any damage that it did. If he accepted responsibility for damage that the animal in his charge would do, and he then chayiv, and if it's a balayla, then it'll be potter. So that's the way how you'd understand this. It's a little bit of a dochik according to Rav to explain it all this way, but that's the only way that it makes sense because you're saying that he borrowed it, but he only accepted responsibility if anything would happen to it. But he didn't take responsibility for damage that the animal in his charge would do. Now tomorrow's Gemara is going to go back and ask Akasha on Reb Lazar. But remember, Reb Lazar is one who explains our Mishnah when it says if it's a animal that if it's an area that was owned by two people, the mazik and the nizik. In other words, it was a partnership in the barn. So if are you potter? According to Rav Chisda said that Rishus Nizik Mazik that you are chayiv. Rav Lezer says no. The Rishus Mazik and Rishus Nizik shein b'regel you're putter, but Rishus Chav Mazik on Karen you're chayiv. Karen, you remember, is chayiv anywhere, even Rishus Rabim, because it's not normal. Karen is not normal for an animal. It's normal for an animal to damage the shein b'regel. So in Rishus Rabim, he's entitled to walk there. If you left stuff there, it's your tough luck. That's what animals do. They walk and they eat. That's what they do. So it's your fault. You're only chayiv and shein b'regel if he goes in somebody else's rishus. And according to Chissa, even if it was the partners, if the two partners, he's chayiv there too. According to Blazer says no. Pater and shein b'regel if it's in a partnership because they both have the rights to be there. And where you chayiv only on Karen, because Karen is chayiv in Rishus Rabim. Karen is chayiv all over because Karen, unless where would Karen be pater? Only in the Rishus of the Mazik, because he could say you have no business coming into my Rishus, but otherwise Karen is chayiv all over. I'll pick him here tomorrow. It's Shem 80. Kasha on Rav.